The forest wasn't just dark. It was a living, breathing entity of shadows, and tonight it was furious. Rain fell not as drops, but as icy spears, each one a needle of cold fear against my skin. My name is Layla, and I was running for my life. My breath tore from my lungs in ragged, burning gasps. 3 days. For 3 endless days and nights, the howls had chased me, a terrifying chorus that promised a fate worse than death. Branches reached out like skeletal fingers, clawing at my worn jacket, trying to pull me back into the nightmare I'd escaped. I'd made the fatal mistake of trusting a smiling face, and now my entire world was ashes. All I had left were the clothes on my back and a secret that pulsed in my veins like a forbidden drumbeat. A secret that would get me killed if they ever caught me. A bone-shaking crack of thunder ripped the sky open. I threw myself against the rough, wet bark of an ancient oak, pressing my palm to my mouth to silence my breathing. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum I was sure they could hear echoing through the pines. The pack hunters were relentless, born trackers. But I was a ghost. I had to be. It was the only reason my heart was still beating. Lightning flashed, a brilliant, terrifying strobe that painted the world in stark white and deepest black. And in that frozen moment of illumination, I saw him. My breath caught. 20 feet away, collapsed against the corpse of a fallen giant of a tree, lay a wolf. But not just any wolf. He was massive, his fur a deep, stormy gray, now matted and clumped with something dark. Blood. Even from here, I could see one of his hind legs bent at a hideous, unnatural angle. His sides barely moved. He was dying, alone in this tempest. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me in a single, clear voice. "Run, Layla. Keep moving. This is not your tragedy to fix." The howls came again, closer now, maybe half a mile. I had minutes, maybe less. I looked at the dying wolf, this magnificent creature broken and abandoned in the mud, and a memory sliced through me, sharp and fresh. It was the memory of my own pack's courtyard, of standing alone as every face I'd ever loved turned away from me in fear and disgust. I knew the cold, suffocating weight of being left behind. Another howl, this one so close it vibrated in my teeth. I made a choice, a stupid, reckless, inevitable choice. "Forgive me," I whispered to the empty air, and I pushed away from my shelter. I slipped and stumbled across the slick forest floor, dropping to my knees in the mud beside him. Up close, the damage was horrific. Gashes deeper than my fingers crossed his ribcage, that shattered leg. But there was something else, a scent that cut through the petrichor and blood. Metallic, sharp, and poisonous. Silver. Someone hadn't just hunted this wolf, they had tried to execute him. "Who did this to you?" The words were a mere breath lost in the wind. As if hearing me, his eyes fluttered open. They were the color of ancient amber, fierce and intelligent, holding a clarity that defied his broken state. Those extraordinary eyes locked onto mine, and a jolt, like the lightning above, shot straight down my spine. In their depths, I didn't see the mindless beast of the forest. I saw a king, fallen. A single word echoed in the quiet space of my mind, soft but undeniable: trust. His breath hitched, a pained, wet sound that decided everything. This was beyond dangerous. Using my gift was like lighting a beacon in this darkness, a signal any hunter with the right senses could follow from miles. But to let this light in his eyes go out, to walk away when I could do something, that would make me a monster of a different kind. I placed my trembling hands over the worst of the wounds on his side, closed my own eyes, and stopped fighting the heat that lived in the core of my being. I let the silver flame rise. Warmth, pure and bright, flowed from my palms into his torn body. Instantly, the silver poison in his blood fought back, a searing, acidic cold that tried to crawl up my own arms. I gritted my teeth, tears mixing with the rain on my face. I pushed harder. Beneath my hands, I felt the impossible begin, the whisper of flesh knitting, the subtle shift of bone beginning its painful realignment. The amber eyes of the wolf widened, gazing at me with an awe that felt utterly misplaced. The healing pulled from me, draining my strength like water from a shattered glass. The world began to tilt, the sounds of the storm fading into a distant roar. Just as my consciousness started to slip, I heard the shouts. The hunters had broken through the tree line. They were here. I had saved him, and now we would both die for it. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was his eyes, holding mine with an intensity that burned brighter than my own fading flame. And the last thing I heard, woven into the wind and rain, was a single growled word that felt both a promise and a sentence. Mine. Consciousness returned not with a jolt, but like drifting to the surface of a deep, warm, dark lake. The first thing I became aware of was the profound silence. No rain, no howling wind, no snapping branches. Then the scent. It enveloped me. Clean linen, sandalwood, and beneath it something wild and untamed, like a forest after a storm. It was the scent from the clearing, but here it was everywhere, woven into the very air. My eyes fluttered open. I was lying in a bed that seemed to swallow me whole, a sea of impossibly soft furs and silken pillows. Above me, a ceiling arched high, crafted from smooth, ancient-looking timber. A fire crackled merrily in a stone hearth large enough to stand inside, casting dancing light over tapestries depicting majestic wolves and mountain ranges. This was not a hunter's lodge. This was a throne room disguised as a bedroom. Panic, cold and sharp, injected itself into my veins. I tried to sit up, and the room spun lazily. A deep, bone-aching weariness held me down, the price of the silver flame. I had used too much, given too freely. "You're awake." The voice came from the shadows near the tall, narrow window. It was the same voice from the edge of my dreams, the one that growled that impossible word, mine. But now it was smooth, layered like honey and gravel, and it commanded the very air in the room. A figure detached itself from the darkness and stepped into the firelight. My breath vanished. He was tall, so tall he had to slightly incline his head under a wooden beam. His shoulders were broad, outlined by a simple dark tunic. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, falling just to his collar. And his eyes, they were the same molten amber that had watched me bleed my light into him, but now, set in a stark, regal face, all sharp angles and quiet power, they were infinitely more dangerous. This was no wounded animal. This was a predator in his prime, in his territory. "Who are you?" My voice was a dry rasp. I cleared my throat, trying to summon strength I didn't have. He didn't smile. His expression was one of calm, unnerving assessment. "You saved my life, little healer. Did you imagine I would not wish to know the name of my savior?" The words were polite, but they felt like a trap. He knew. He knew what I was. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, forcing myself to push up on my elbows. The furs pulled around my waist. I was wearing a simple, clean nightdress that was not my own. The realization sent a fresh wave of unease through me. "I was lost in the storm. I found shelter." "Layla," he said, and the sound of my name on his lips, spoken with such absolute certainty, was a violation. "Of the Shattered Crescent Pack, exiled 3 years ago under a seal of silence. You have been drifting through the borderlands like a ghost ever since." He took a single, deliberate step closer. "But you are no ghost. You are a woman with a very rare, very powerful light inside her, a light that pulled death itself from my veins." He knew everything. my past, my shame, my secret. I felt exposed, flayed open under that amber gaze. How? The word was a whisper of dread. Because, he said, his voice dropping into a quiet that was more threatening than any shout. I have been looking for you. The admission hung between us, a guillotine waiting to fall. I scrambled back on the bed until my shoulders hit the ornate headboard, with nowhere else to go. Looking for me? Why? To turn me over to the hunters? To the Silver Council? The old fear, the one that had haunted my every step for 3 years, rose up, choking me. For the first time, his expression shifted, a flicker of something, not pity, but a strange understanding. The Silver Council are fools governed by fear. They see a storm and blame the first cloud. He moved then, with that unsettling, graceful speed, sitting on the edge of the bed, far enough not to touch me, but close enough that his presence was a physical weight. 3 years ago, a healer of legend disappeared. The same night, every seer, every elder with the sight, from the mountains to the sea, woke from the same vision. A woman standing at a crossroads with silver fire in her hands and a storm in her eyes. A woman who would decide the fate of the veil between our world and the next. I shook my head, a frantic denial. No, that's not me. You have the wrong person. I'm cursed. Everything I touch turns to ruin. I don't decide fates. I destroy them. He leaned forward just slightly, and the firelight caught the gold in his eyes. I healed you, Layla. Silver poison should have killed us both when you touched it. Your flame didn't just mend flesh. It called to something in my blood, something that has slept for generations. He held my terrified gaze. Do you know what that makes you? I couldn't speak. I could only stare, trapped in the gravity of his words. It makes you the fated guide of the dire Wolf King. He let the title sit in the silence. My name is Kaylin, and the prophecy says you are the only one who can help me stand against what is coming. King? The title was a breath of disbelief. The dire Wolf King was a myth, a bedtime story told to scare pups, a ruler of a lost bloodline, a guardian who had vanished centuries ago. The shadows you have been running from are not just pack hunters, Layla. They are scavengers, drawn by the weakening of the veil. My wound was not from a rival pack. It was from a creature that should not be able to walk in our world. The darkness is stirring, and the prophecy says a silver flame healer is the key to sealing it away once more. He was offering me a narrative so vast, so insane, it overshadowed my own personal tragedy. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman, a reason for the pain, a purpose for the curse. But the memory of that possessive growl in the storm echoed in my soul. Mine. Was this salvation, or simply a prettier cage? Why should I believe you? I asked, my voice trembling. Why should I believe any of this? Kaylin did not look away. Because, little healer, if you do not, then everything you have ever run from, every fear that haunts your nights, will be nothing compared to what will come for us all. The storm in the forest was just the beginning. Outside the tall window, in the distance, a lone, unnatural howl rose into the night, a sound that was all wrong, that twisted the stomach and chilled the soul. It was not the howl of any wolf I had ever known. Kaylin's eyes hardened. He heard it too. The proof of his warning was already at his gates. The unnatural howl faded, leaving a silence that was thicker, more menacing than before. It coiled in the corners of the lavish room, a serpent of dread. Kaylin's eyes remained fixed on the window, his profile a mask of stern focus. The king had vanished, replaced by the warrior, the guardian, sensing a threat to his domain. The shift in him was more convincing than any of his words. My own fear, a constant companion for years, recognized the genuine article in his stillness. What was that? I whispered, the question tearing from my tight throat. That's a scout, Kaylin said, his voice low. Testing the borders. The wards around this stronghold are old and strong, but they are fraying. He finally turned his head back to me. As the veil thins, their kind grow bolder. He stood, moving with that quiet, powerful grace to a heavy wooden table. He poured water from a pitcher into a crystal globet and brought it to me. The simple human gesture was disarming. Drink. The silver flame takes as much as it gives. You need to regain your strength. I took the globet, my fingers brushing his. A tiny electric spark jumped between us. Not painful, but startlingly vivid. I flinched, water sloshing. His amber eyes flickered, but he said nothing, withdrawing his hand. I drank, the cool water a balm. Your people, the Crescent Pack, they only ever spoke of my power as a corruption, a danger. The old shame warmed my cheeks. They said I disrupted the natural order. Kalen returned to his seat by the window, a pensive look on his face. The Crescent Pack, like many, grow comfortable. They forgot the old ways, the old threats. They preferred a simple world where a wolf was just a wolf and a healer's power was gentle and green. He looked at me and there was no judgment in his gaze, just a weary understanding. Your flame is not gentle, Layla. It is primal. It is the light that existed before the green growth. It does not just heal wounds, it reveals truths. It can purify poison, yes, but it can also awaken dormant legacies. My heart clenched. Awaken? The memory was a blade, freshly sharpened. Is that what I did? To someone else? He understood my unspoken question, the someone else whose name I could not bear to speak. Tell me what happens, Layla, not what your pack decreed. Tell me what you felt, what you saw. The command was soft, but it unlocked the box inside me where I kept the horror. The room, with its firelight and safety, seemed to recede. I was back in the healer's hut, the coppery scent of blood filling my nose, my heart pounding with terror and love. His name was Eris, I began, the name ash on my tongue. He was everything, the Alpha's youngest son, beloved. I stared into the depths of my goblet, seeing not water, but the past. He was brought back from a border skirmish, his chest ripped open, silver-laced claws having done their venomous work. He was dying, and I couldn't let him go. The tears came then, hot and silent. I didn't just heal him. I poured everything I was, every ounce of that silver fire I'd always hidden, into him. I wanted to give him not just his life, but all the life, all the strength I had. For 3 days, it was a miracle. He was stronger, faster, his senses preternatural. They called me blessed. I swallowed the sob that threatened to break me. Then the change began. It wasn't just strength. It was a rage, a hunger. His wolf, it stopped being a part of him. It became all of him. He couldn't shift back. And when he hunted, I squeezed my eyes shut. He stopped hunting for food. He hunted for the thrill, for the silence after. The memory of the clearing was etched behind my eyelids. 16 bodies, 16 members of a peaceful neighboring pack, torn apart not in battle, but in a grotesque game. And Eris standing in the center, his eyes not the warm brown I loved, but a blazing, pitiless silver. He became something else, I choked out. Something from the old tales, a monster. They called it a dire wolf. It took both packs and 3 days to bring him down. The final image of my own father raising the silver-loaded rifle, his face a mask of utter devastation, slammed into me. They said I awakened a bloodline that should have stayed buried, that my love was a curse, my gift a weapon of mass destruction. Silence followed my confession, broken only by the crackling fire. I expected to see revulsion in Kalen's eyes, the same look that had sent me into exile. Instead, I saw profound sorrow. They were wrong, Layla, he said, his voice a low vibration. Tragically, catastrophically wrong. The direwolf bloodline is not a monster. It is a protector, a guardian bred to stand at the threshold between worlds and hold the line against the shadows that now howl at my gates. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. What you awakened in Eris was not a curse. It was his true, buried nature. But it was a nature that came with a terrible price. It requires immense control, immense discipline, and most of all, guidance. He had none. He was a boy suddenly handed a king's power and a warrior's brutal instincts, with no one to teach him how to wield either. The silver flame revealed his destiny, but your pack's fear doomed him to fail it. His words were an avalanche, burying the narrative I had lived with for 3 years. They didn't absolve the pain, but they shifted its foundation. The guilt didn't vanish, but it morphed, twisting into a grief so deep and complex it stole my breath. You're saying it wasn't my fault? I'm saying, Kaelin corrected gently, that the fault belongs to ignorance. Your pack feared what they did not understand, and in their fear, they destroyed their only chance to understand it. They lost a guardian, created a martyr, and exiled their only key to preventing it from happening again. He stood, walking back to the window. I am a direwolf, Layla, born, not made. I have spent a lifetime learning the control Eris never had. The hunger he succumbed to is a part of me, yes, but it is a tool, not a master. I use it to protect. The prophecy says a silver flame healer is the compass for a direwolf's power, not to control it, but to help navigate it, to purify its purpose, to be the light that shows the path through the inner darkness. He turned, the firelight hallowing his form. The shadows are rising because the last of the true direwolves grew old and faded, and there was no silver flame to help forge a new one. The balance is broken. I am trying to hold it alone, but I cannot seal the veil without you. The weight of it all, the rewritten past, the terrifying future, the immense responsibility pressed down on me. I was just Layla, the broken exile, not a compass, not a key. I don't know how, I whispered, the admission hollow. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first I'd seen. It transformed his stern face, revealing a warmth that was startling. Then we will learn together. But first, you must choose. You can walk out that door. I will not stop you. You can return to running, to hiding from the shadows at your heels and the ones in your heart. He took a step toward the bed, his gaze holding mine with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. Or, he said, his voice dropping to a murmur that seemed to resonate in my very bones. Or, you can stay. You can face the storm with me. You can learn what your gift truly means, and you can help me ensure that what happened to Eris never, ever happens to anyone again. The choice lay before me, stark and terrifying, the safe path of familiar fear or the dangerous, unknown path of a purpose I could barely comprehend. Outside, another twisted howl pierced the night, closer this time. The decision, it seemed, would not wait. I did not walk out the door. The memory of Eris's silver eyes, so full of lost humanity, and Kaelin's amber eyes, full of a burdensome purpose, held me fast. If there was a chance, even a sliver, that my curse could be used to prevent another such tragedy, how could I run? The following morning, after a sleepless night, I found myself following Kaelin through a part of his territory that felt untouched by time. This was not the curated forest of a royal estate. This was the deep, ancient wild. The trees here were titans, their trunks wider than cottages, their canopies lost in a mist that seemed to glow with its own soft light. The air hummed with a subtle energy that made the silver flame in my core stir in sleepy recognition. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice small against the immense, breathing silence of the place.
My strength was returning, but the profound magic here was overwhelming. To a place that remembers, Kalen replied, not turning. His movements were sure, a part of the landscape itself. We walked for what felt like hours, descending into a valley where the mist curled around our ankles like living smoke. Strange phosphorescent moss clung to the rocks, and the very shadows between the trees seemed to hold a darker, watchful depth. Then I saw them, symbols, carved into the bark of the ancient trees, etched into lichen-covered stones. They weren't like any pack runes I knew. They were older, more fluid, and they seemed to shift. If I looked directly at one, it held its shape, but from the corner of my eye, they swirled and changed, telling stories in a language of shapes and light. Kalen, I breathed, stopping. A wave of vertigo passed through me. Kalen, what is this place?
He finally stopped and turned. In the ethereal light, his eyes glowed with a faint internal radiance. This is the first grove, Layla, the heart of the wilds. It is said the first shift happened here when the spirit of the wolf in the mind of man first chose to walk as one. It is a place of truth, of origins. He extended his hand toward me, not a command, an invitation. Will you see? I stared at his outstretched palm. Trust was a currency I had spent recklessly and lost everything. Yet the symbols on the trees pulsed with a light that matched the rhythm of my own heartbeat. My silver flame, usually a quiet ember, was a steady, warm glow in my chest, reaching for this place, for him. I placed my hand in his. The moment our skin touched, the grove awoke. The humming energy became a chorus, a beautiful, ancient song that vibrated in my teeth and my bones. The carved symbols blazed with silver fire, my silver fire. The air thickened, sweet and charged, and the mist at our feet began to spiral, glowing with millions of tiny, dancing lights like captured starlight. I gasped, clinging to Kalen's hand as the world transformed around us. I could feel the memories in the stones, echoes of joy, of terror, of the first great bonding of spirit and flesh. I could hear whispers on the wind, voices from a time before time. Do you feel it? Kalen's voice was filled with awe. The truth of what we are? I could only nod, tears of a profound, inexplicable recognition streaming down my face. This was not a place of corruption. It was a place of pure, sacred origin. And my power? It belonged here. He led me, our hands still linked, to the very center of the grove. There, resting on a bed of that glowing moss, was a stone. Not an altar, but a naturally formed plinth, smooth and dark. And on its surface, as if painted by moonlight, was a single, intricate symbol. A wolf howling, its form woven from elegant looping silver flames. The mark of the silver flame. My free hand flew to my left shoulder, where a birthmark I had hidden and hated my entire life suddenly burned as if branded. I knew without seeing it that it had changed, that it now matched the symbol on the stone. No, I whispered, stumbling back, breaking contact with Kalen. The connection to the grove dimmed slightly, but the burning on my shoulder remained. I'm not some chosen one. I'm a healer who makes mistakes. The grove does not lie, Layla. Kalen's voice was steady, but his eyes wide with something like reverence. It shows only what is. That mark has always been a part of you. The exile, the fear, the pain. It was the journey to bring you here, to this moment, to your true self. Before I could protest further, the silver symbol on the stone flared blindingly bright. The whispering winds coalesced into clear, resonant voices that spoke not in my ears, but directly into my soul. When silver fire burns in mortal hand, and the guardian wolf makes his final stand, the marked one rises, heart and flame, to mend the world and bear its name. She walks the threshold, light her guide, with the dire wolf steadfast at her side. The voices faded, leaving a silence so absolute it was deafening.
The prophecy hung in the air, alive and tangible. "I can't," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm not strong enough." "You are," Kaylin insisted, taking a step toward me. "You have carried this alone for too long. You don't have to be strong enough alone anymore." His words were a balm and a terror. The idea of leaning on someone, of sharing this burden, was more frightening than bearing it myself. Dependency led to betrayal. Love led to destruction. A rustle in the trees, too loud, too clumsy for this sacred place, shattered the moment. The peaceful energy of the grove twisted into a spike of alarm. Through the mist, figures emerged, not shadow creatures, but men and women, armed, and at their front, a face I'd prayed never to see again. Jarek, Alpha of the Crescent Pack, my former Alpha, the man who had pronounced my exile. His cold eyes swept the mystical grove with disdain before landing on me, then on Kaylin with open hostility. "Layla, you were warned. You were banished with a death sentence hanging over your head if you ever used your abomination of a gift again." His gaze flickered to the still glowing stone. "And now I find you here, in this corrupted place with him, consorting with legends that should stay dead. Did you think we would not feel the ripple of your power, that we would not come to finish what we started?" My blood turned to ice. The safety I'd begun to feel in the grove vanished. The past had found me, and it had brought an army.
"Layla created nothing in me but a debt of life," Kaylin replied, his tone turning icy. "I was born what I am. Your ignorance does not change reality." "Born?" Jarek took a step forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his silver-edged dagger. "No one is born a dire wolf. The bloodlines were purged for a reason. They are abominations, violent, uncontrollable forces of nature." His accusing finger swung to point at me. "And she is the spark that lights that tinder. She turned my son into a butcher, 16 innocents dead by his hand. And now she's done it again, hasn't she? Awakened the beast in you?" "You will not speak of what you do not understand." Kaylin's voice dropped into a growl that was barely human. The air grew colder. "I understand perfectly," Jarek roared, his composure cracking to reveal the raw, grieving father beneath the Alpha's rage. "I understand that my boy is dead, that 16 families mourned because of her, and I understand the law of our people, a life for a life, her life for the 17 she stole." He gestured sharply. His warriors raised their bows, arrows nocked and pointed at my heart. "Wait!" The word tore from me, propelled by a desperation that overrode my fear. I stepped out from behind Kaylin, ignoring his warning glance. "Jarek, Alpha, please. He's telling the truth. What happened to Eris, it wasn't awakening a monster. It was a gift he didn't know how to carry. I didn't know how to guide him. We failed him. But this is different." "Different?" Jarek's eyes were pits of pain. "How? By allying with a fairy tale king? By hiding in a forest that whispers lies? You are cursed, Layla. Everything you touch turns to ash. Stand aside, or your legendary king will die beside you." "If she is cursed," Kaylin said, his voice suddenly quiet and more dangerous than any shout, "then why does the heart of the wilds, the oldest magic of our kind, recognize her? Why does it sing for her?" He pointed to the stone, where the silver flame symbol still pulsed with a soft, stubborn light. For the first time, Jarek's certainty seemed to falter. His eyes darted to the stone, to the swirling magical mist, to the ancient symbols on the trees. This place defied his simple, brutal worldview. It was then that Elder Morwen, Jarek's most trusted advisor and the pack's stern historian, pushed through the warriors. Her ancient eyes scanned the grove, not with hatred, but with a dawning, horrified recognition. "Alpha," she said, her voice trembling.
He speaks a terrible truth. This is the first grove. It is in the oldest scrolls, the ones we sealed away. And the energy here, it is not corruption. It is awakening." She looked at me, her gaze filled with a new fear. "The girl's power, it is stirring the old wards. Can you not feel it? The barriers here are thin. Her very presence is straining them." As if summoned by her words, the grove darkened. The beautiful glowing mist turned a sickly gray. From the deep shadows between the colossal trees, shapes began to coalesce. Not wolves, but fragments of darkness given form. They had no distinct features, just a swirling, malevolent essence, and eyes that burned with a hungry red light. Shadow walkers. The Crescent warriors swung their weapons toward the new threat, confusion and terror on their faces. Arrows flew, but passed through the smoky forms harmlessly. "You see?" Elder Morwen cried, her voice rising in panic. "Her power is a beacon. It is calling them, tearing the veil." Chaos erupted. The shadow creatures flowed forward, silent and deadly. A warrior screamed as one wrapped around his arm, the limb withering to gray ash in seconds. The sacred grove became a battleground. In the midst of the terror, I stood frozen, Elder Morwen's accusation ringing in my ears. Her power is tearing the veil. Was it true? Was my very existence causing this? I felt a warm, steady hand on my shoulder. "Kaylin." "Look at me, Layla," he commanded, his voice cutting through the panic. "This is not your doing. The veil has been weakening for a century. Your light is not tearing it open. It is the only thing they're afraid of, the only thing that can send them back." He turned me to face the onslaught. "They fear the silver flame. Show them why." He believed in me. Even now, surrounded by enemies from my past and nightmares from the void, he believed. The shadow walker that had consumed the warrior's arm turned its hollow, burning eyes toward us. It drifted forward, a stain on reality. My fear crystallized into a sharp, clean point. I was tired of being a victim, tired of being a curse. I raised my hands, closed my eyes, and reached for the core of my being, not to heal, but to reveal, to burn away the lies, the fear, the darkness. The silver flame answered. It erupted from me, not as a gentle warmth, but as a brilliant, silent shockwave of pure argent light. It filled the grove, washing over the trees, the stone, the combatants. The shadow walker in front of us shrieked, a sound that came from nowhere and everywhere, and dissolved into wisps of harmless smoke. The other creatures recoiled, hissing, retreating into the deepest shadows. The light faded. I swayed, the effort immense. The grove was quiet again, the unnatural darkness gone. The Crescent warriors stared at me, their weapons lowered, faces etched with awe and confusion. Jarek stood rigid, looking at the scorched ground where the shadow had been. To me, to Kaylin, who stood steadfast at my side. His rage was still there, but it was now mixed with a world-shattering doubt. Kaylin's hand remained on my shoulder, a solid anchor. "The true enemy is not in this grove, Alpha," he said, his voice ringing with finality. "And the woman you came to execute is the only one who can help us fight it. The question is, will you stand in her way, or will you finally open your eyes?" The silence in the wake of the silver blast was profound. The shadow walkers were gone, but the tension they had ignited now crackled between the two groups of wolves. My legs trembled, a hollow ache spreading from my core. Using the flame like that, as a weapon of pure light, had drained me differently than healing. It felt like I had poured out a piece of my soul. Jarek stared at the spot where the creature had vanished. The absolute certainty that had carved lines of hatred in his face was crumbling, leaving behind raw, bewildered grief. He looked old. He looked at me, and for a fleeting moment, I didn't see the alpha who had cast me out. I saw Eris's father, a man who had lost his son and needed someone to blame. Elder Morwen was the first to break the stalemate. She bowed her head, not to Jarek, but to me. It was a shallow, reluctant gesture, but it was a seismic shift. The old tales, they spoke of a cleansing fire, a light that could banish the shadow sickness. We called it a myth, a metaphor. It is neither, Kalen said, his voice firm but losing its edge of confrontation. He kept his hand on my shoulder, a silent declaration of alliance. And the power that has been absent for too long, and its return is not an accident. The veil weakens, and the balance demands its guardians.
Jarek finally found his voice, though it was stripped of its earlier fury. And you claim to be this guardian? This dire wolf king? The title was no longer a sneer, but a genuine, bewildered question. I do not claim it, Kalen said, his gaze sweeping over the Crescent warriors. It is what I am. It is the blood that runs in my veins, the duty that has been passed to me. I have held the line alone at the border places, in the thin spaces where the world grows faint, but I cannot hold it forever. The pressure grows. The scouts you saw today are just the beginning. He looked down at me, his amber eyes softening. The prophecy of the silver flame and the dire wolf is not a story of domination. It is a story of partnership, of balance. The flame provides clarity, purification, light to see the path. The wolf provides the strength, the endurance, the will to walk it and protect it. One cannot seal the veil without the other. He was painting a picture so different from the narrative of my exile. Not a healer creating monsters, but a guide helping a guardian. Not a curse, but a crucial half of a sacred whole. Jarek's shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him, leaving only exhaustion and the ghost of his son. All this time, we thought we were purging a sickness, protecting our people. You were, I said softly, surprising myself. All eyes turned to me. You were protecting them from what you didn't understand, from the horror of what happened to Eris. I thought the same thing for 3 years, that I was the sickness. I took a shaky step forward, away from Kalen's supportive touch, facing my past directly. But what if we were wrong? What if the sickness is out there? I gestured to the shadows of the forest beyond the grove. And what I carry isn't the disease, but the cure. A painful, terrifying cure, but the only one we have? The words hung in the sacred air. The glowing moss at our feet pulsed gently, as if in agreement. Elder Morwen stepped closer to Jarek, speaking in a low, urgent voice. Alpha, the evidence of our eyes, the ancient lore, the girl's power, they align. We came here seeking an abomination. We may have found a savior. She seemed to struggle with the word. To strike her down now would be to blind ourselves in our own pride. Jarek closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, the grief was still there, but the blinding rage was gone. He looked at Kalen. What would you have of us then, King? We cannot undo the past. We cannot bring back the dead. No, Kalen agreed, his voice grave, but you can choose the future. The shadows are rising. They will not stop at my borders, or yours. They will consume everything. Layla and I must travel to the source of the tear, the place where the veil is weakest, to attempt the sealing. We could use warriors. We could use those who are willing to learn, to see the world as it truly is, not as they wish it to be. It was an offer of redemption, a chance to move from being agents of fear to being defenders of reality. Jarek's shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him, leaving only exhaustion and the ghost of his son. All this time, we thought we were purging a sickness, protecting our people. You were, I said softly, surprising myself. All eyes turned to me. You were protecting them from what you didn't understand, from the horror of what happened to Eris. I thought the same thing for 3 years, that I was the sickness. I took a shaky step forward,
away from Kaylin's supportive touch, facing my past directly. But what if we were wrong? What if the sickness is out there? I gestured to the shadows of the forest beyond the grove. And what I carry isn't the disease, but the cure. A painful, terrifying cure, but the only one we have?
And when we find it, I asked, my breath puffing in the cold air. His jaw tightened. Then we see how wide the tear has become, and we do what the prophecy suggests. We stand together, and we try to mend it. The journey was arduous. The paths were treacherous, often little more than goat tracks along sheer drops. The Shadow Scouts did not attack again in force, but we felt their presence. A flicker of movement where nothing stood. A whisper that wasn't the wind. The temperature would suddenly plummet in a sunlit patch, raising goosebumps on our arms. The land itself felt sick, wounded. On the third night, we made camp in a high, narrow pass. The crescent moon was a shard of bone in the sky. I sat apart from the main fire, trying to warm my hands over a smaller blaze. The silver flame within me felt restless, agitated by the proximity to the source. I didn't hear him approach, but I felt the shift in the air. Jarek stood a few feet away, holding 2 metal cups. He looked even more worn in the firelight. "May I?" he asked, his voice gruff. I nodded, unsure of what to say. He sat on a rock opposite me, handing me one of the cups. It contained a simple, hot herbal broth. He stared into his own cup for a long moment. "I owe you a life's worth of apologies, Layla," he began, the words clearly painful. "I led with fear. I saw what happened to my boy, and I needed it to be someone's fault. I needed it to be simple. Your gift was strange, powerful. It was the easiest target." I took a sip of the broth, its warmth doing little to melt the ice in my heart. "You weren't alone, Jarek. I blamed myself more than anyone." "That does not absolve me," he said, finally looking at me. The grief in his eyes was a raw, open wound. "As Alpha, my first duty was to understand, to seek wisdom, not just vengeance. I failed you. I failed Eris. I failed the pack." He took a shuddering breath. "When you spoke in the grove about Eris wanting his death to be a lesson, I heard his voice in yours. For the first time since we lost him, I felt like I could honor him, not just mourn him." His honesty disarmed me. The anger I had nurtured for so long began to soften at the edges. "We all failed him," I whispered. "But maybe failing forward is the only way through." He gave another of those slow, respectful nods. "This king of yours, he sees you, not as a tool or a danger, but as you are. That is a rare thing." He stood, his old joints cracking. "Get some rest. The climb tomorrow is worse." He walked back to the main fire, leaving me with my swirling thoughts and the bitter broth. Kaylin did see me, but the memory of that possessive word in the storm, mine, still echoed. Was it a claim of destiny or of ownership? Later, as I lay in my bedroll staring at the cold stars, Kaylin took the watch. He stood at the edge of the pass, a silhouette against the night, utterly still. I saw his form subtly change, his shoulders broadening, his posture becoming even more predatory. He wasn't just looking out into the darkness. He was listening to it, smelling it, feeling it with senses I could not comprehend. The dire wolf watching over his pack. A strange sense of safety, deep and quiet, settled over me. I closed my eyes. I was jolted awake what felt like minutes later by a sound that was utterly alien. It wasn't a howl or a roar. It was a crack deep in the earth, followed by a low, resonant groan, as if the mountain itself was in pain. I scrambled up. Everyone was awake, weapons drawn. The air now thrummed with a palpable wrongness. The ground beneath our feet vibrated.
Kalen was already pointing to the far end of the pass. There, the tear is manifesting. Where before there had been solid rock wall, now a shimmering vertical rift hung in the air. It was like looking at a rip in a canvas painting. Through it, we didn't see the other side of the mountain. We saw a swirling, chaotic void, shot through with jagged purple lightning. And from that void, figures were crawling, clawing their way into our world. These were not the wispy shadow scouts. These were larger, more solid. They had the twisted, parodic shapes of wolves, but made of shifting darkness and crackling energy. Their eyes were pits of nothingness. The tear had found us, and it was spilling its guardians into our path. The void wolves poured from the shimmering rift with a silent, predatory grace that was more terrifying than any roar. The air turned frigid, smelling of ozone and decay. The Crescent Warriors, to their credit, didn't falter. They formed a defensive line, a wall of fur and steel and bared teeth, though fear was a live wire in the air. Kalen didn't shift. He stood at the front, a bastion of calm. They are drawn to life force, to fear. Hold your ground. Do not let them separate you. The first creature lunged. It moved like a liquid shadow, flowing around a warrior's sword strike. Its form brushed one man's arm, and he screamed, not in pain, but in existential terror, collapsing as if his very will had been sucked out of him. Their touch drains more than flesh. It drains spirit. Kalen shouted, "Layla, the light!" He didn't have to ask twice. The silver flame within me was already roaring, responding to the profound wrongness of these entities. They were not just invaders, they were anti-life, voids that fed on existence itself. I pushed past the wall of warriors, my hands coming up. But this wasn't like in the grove. The flames sputtered, uncertain. The sheer, oppressive despair radiating from the creatures was like a wet blanket smothering my power. I could feel it. Their hunger was a vacuum, trying to pull the light from my very soul. Focus on the flame within, not the darkness without. Kalen's voice was a command, an anchor. He moved then, not toward the rift, but to stand back to back with me. They fear your light, but they will try to extinguish it by drowning you in their despair. Do not look into the void. Look into your own heart. I closed my eyes, blocking out the nightmare scene. I ignored the screams, the clash of metal on ephemeral flesh. I reached inward, past the fear, past the memory of Eris, past the pain of exile. I searched for the first spark, the reason I had ever used my gift, not out of pride or duty, but out of a simple human desire to stop hurt. I found it, a memory of a childhood friend, a scraped knee, my small hands glowing with a fascinated, gentle warmth as the pain faded and a smile returned. My hands blazed. This time, the silver light was different. It wasn't a shock wave. It was a steady, brilliant beam, pure and focused. I aimed it at the void wolf closest to a struggling pair of Crescent Warriors.
The creature shrieked, that silent, mind-rending shriek. Where the light touched it, the darkness didn't just retreat, it unraveled, dissolving into motes of harmless gray ash that vanished on the wind. The warriors, freed, stared in stunned gratitude before turning to the next foe. "Yes," Kalen growled, a sound of fierce approval. Now, together, we'd push them back. He began to move, and I moved with him, an instinctual dance. He was the shield, the relentless force, using his own formidable aura of primal authority to buffet the creatures, to disrupt their forms. His presence was a challenge to their emptiness. I was the sword, the precise, purifying strike. Where he created an opening, I sent a lance of silver fire, severing connections to the void, burning away the despair they emanated. We were two halves of a whole. His strength protected my focus. My light amplified his purpose, making the space around us inhospitable to the shadows. The Crescent warriors, seeing our tactic, adapted. They stopped trying to land killing blows and began herding, distracting, creating openings for the silver flame to finish the work. Step by step, we pushed the nightmarish pack back toward the shimmering rift. The ground was littered with ash and recovering wolves, but we had no serious losses. Hope, fragile and fierce, began to burn in the hearts of my former pack. As the last void wolf was cornered before the tear, it did something unexpected. Instead of attacking, it seemed to gather the remnants of its brethren's dissipated energy. Its form solidified, growing more distinct, and it spoke. Not with a voice, but by projecting words directly into our minds, a cold, scraping sensation against our thoughts. The flame returns, the guardian stands, the pattern repeats. But the tear is wider now, the devourer stirs. You mend a scratch while the artery bleeds. Your light is a candle in his coming storm. Then, with a final contemptuous ripple, it turned and leapt back into the chaotic rift. The surviving creatures flowed after it like smoke returning to a bottle. The rift shimmered violently, then snapped shut with a sound like a thunderclap contained in glass. The unnatural cold vanished, leaving only the normal, biting mountain chill. Silence descended, broken only by the heavy breathing of exhausted warriors. The words of the void wolf echoed in the sudden quiet. The devourer. Kalen's face was grim. He walked to the now solid rock wall where the rift had been, placing a hand against the stone. "It's still here," he murmured. "The weakness. This was just a capillary, a small leak. The source, the artery, is still ahead." He looked at me, his eyes shadowed. They were not just guarding the tear, they were delivering a message, a warning. Elder Morwen approached, her face pale. What is this devourer? Kalen turned to face the gathered, weary group. The oldest shadow, the reason the first dire wolves and silver flames made their pact. It is not a creature of the void. It is the void given consciousness and hunger. It seeks to unmake reality, to return everything to the stillness that existed before time. The weakening veil is its invitation, and it seems our efforts have not been unnoticed. He walked back to stand beside me. The journey just became more urgent. That was a skirmish. The war awaits us at the source. His gaze swept over the pack. You have fought bravely. You have seen the true enemy. The path from here will only grow more dangerous. Any who wish to turn back, now is the time. No shame will be attached. No one moved. No one looked away. The fear in their eyes had been tempered into a hard, determined resolve. They had seen the enemy, and they had seen it driven back by our combined strength. Jarek stepped forward, placing his fist over his heart in a pack oath that had not been used in generations. "The Crescent Pack sees its duty," he said, his voice strong. "We stand with the flame and the guardian, to the source." A low murmur of agreement ran through the warriors. In that moment, shivering on a mountain pass, surrounded by hardened faces lit by the dawn's first light, I understood what a true pack could be. Not just a family, but a purpose. And I was no longer at its edges. I was at its heart, standing shoulder to shoulder with a king. The encounter at the pass changed us. The Crescent warriors were no longer reluctant followers. They were converts to a cause they now viscerally understood. The easy camaraderie of a hunting party was gone, replaced by the grim focus of soldiers marching to a front line. Even Jarek deferred to Kalen's leadership without hesitation, the old alpha recognizing the scope of a battle far beyond pack rivalries. My mark was a constant, burning guide. It led us off the known paths, down into a deep, winding canyon that seemed to swallow the sky. The bleeding mountains lived by their name here. The striated rock walls glistened with a damp, deep red hue, as if the stone itself was wounded. The air grew thick and heavy, and sound behaved strangely.
A whisper from the front of our column would echo and reach the back as a shout, and the wind through the narrows didn't sound like wind. It sounded like voices. The Canyon of Whispers. It was here that the land's sickness was most acute. Patches of vegetation were gray and brittle, crumbling to dust at a touch. Strange phosphorescent fungi pulsed with a sickly green light in the perpetual gloom. The sense of being watched was oppressive, a weight on our chests. "This place remembers pain," Kaylin said quietly as we picked our way along a treacherous ledge. Great battles were fought here in the first wars against the shadows. The land soaked up the fear, the rage, the death. That energy has festered. It feeds the tear, makes it harder to close. "And it plays tricks on the mind," Elder Morwen added, her voice tight. "The whispers are not just echoes. They are impressions, residual emotions. Do not listen to them. Focus on the person in front of you." It was good advice, but nearly impossible to follow. As we descended deeper, the whispers grew more distinct. "Turn back," sighed a voice that sounded like a grieving mother. "It's hopeless," groaned another, thick with despair. "They will all die because of you, Layla." This one was a cold, familiar hiss that curled around my heart. It sounded like my own inner voice at its darkest. I clenched my fists, focusing on the solid feel of the rock under my palms, on the steady rhythm of Kaylin's footsteps ahead of me. But the whispers were insidious. For Jarek, they took the voice of his son. "Father, why did you let her do this to me? Why did you let her make me a monster?" Jarek stumbled, his face a mask of fresh agony, and a warrior had to grab his arm to steady him. For Kaylin, the whispers were different. I saw his shoulders tense as a chorus of cold, regal voices seemed to swirl around him. "The last king failed. The line ends with you. You are not strong enough. You will doom them all." He didn't falter in his step, but his knuckles were white where he gripped a rocky outcrop. The canyon seemed to have no end. The oppressive atmosphere and the psychic assault wore us down, far more than the physical climb. Morale, so high after our victory, began to seep away into the damp, whispering air. The breaking point came when we reached a dead end, a sheer wall of the weeping red stone. The path seemed to vanish. My mark, however, blazed with such heat it was nearly painful. It was pulling me straight toward the wall.
"There is no way forward," one of the younger warriors cried out, panic edging his voice. "We're trapped. The whispers led us to a tomb." A wave of despair rippled through the group. The whispers surged, gleeful. "See? Foolish. Lost. You led your people to die." Kaylin turned, his amber eyes flashing with a light that momentarily pushed back the gloom. "Silence!" he roared, and his voice held the full force of his kingship, a physical wave that actually silenced the echo voices for a heartbeat. "This is the test. The land itself tries to break our will." "Layla," he said, turning to me, his voice dropping, "your mark does not lie. What does it tell you?" I stepped forward, placing my palms against the cold, wet stone of the dead-end wall. I closed my eyes, letting the silver flame rise not from my hands, but from the core of my being, letting it flow into the mark on my shoulder. The hum became a song, a clear, high note that resonated with something deep within the mountain. "It's not a wall," I breathed, my voice full of wonder. "It's a veil, a mirror. The canyon isn't a trap, it's a threshold." I pushed, not with physical strength, but with intent, with the pure, seeking light of the silver flame. The stone in front of my hands began to shimmer. The solid rock dissolved into a curtain of swirling, silver-tinged mist, revealing a hidden passage that sloped downward into a deep, quiet darkness. The oppressive weight of the whispers vanished, cut off as if a door had closed. From the new passage, a clean, cold wind blew, carrying the scent of snow and ancient power. A collective gasp went up from the pack. Jarek stared, then looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. "You
You opened the way. Kalen placed a hand on my back, a profound solidarity. The flame reveals the path, he said, his words for everyone. It always has. He looked into the newly revealed passage, then back at our wary, hopeful company. The final leg of the journey lies ahead. The source of the tear is close. Gather your courage. What lies beyond this veil is the reason for everything. One by one, led by Kalen and myself, we passed through the shimmering curtain of mist. As I stepped across the threshold, the last of the whispers reached out, a final desperate ploy in a voice that was a perfect mimic of Kalen's own, but filled with a sly malice. She is the key, yes, but who holds the key, little king? Do you guide the flame, or does it guide you? Remember the first law of shadows. The brighter the light, the deeper the darkness it casts. Then the mist closed behind us, and we stood in a vast subterranean cavern, and all thoughts of whispers were driven from our minds by what we saw before us. The cavern was a cathedral carved by time and trauma. Stalactites and stalagmites, the size of ancient towers, glittered with embedded crystals that gave off a soft blue-white light, illuminating the space in an eerie, beautiful glow. The air was frigid and still, smelling of deep earth and ozone. At the far end of the immense chamber, the source of that ozone smell was horrifyingly clear. It was not a simple rift like in the past. This was the source. Imagine the world's fabric as a great tapestry. Here, a ragged, weeping hole had been torn in the center of it. The edges of the tear were not clean, but frayed and pulsating with sickly violet energy. Through it, we didn't see a void, but a swirling, chaotic maelstrom of impossible colors and shapes, a madness of unformed reality. It was a wound that went deeper than space. It was a wound in existence itself. And from it emanated a profound, soul-chilling wrongness that made the void wolves seem like minor irritations. This was the artery, and it was bleeding the essence of our world into the chaos. But the tear itself was not the only horror. The cavern floor between us and it was not empty. It was littered with bones, ancient, massive wolf bones that formed a grim, concentric pattern around the source. And standing, motionless amidst this ossuary, were more of the void wolves, at least 50 of them, silent and waiting. They were not scouts or messengers. They were the garrison. At the very foot of the pulsating tear, something else stood. It was vaguely humanoid, but tall and impossibly thin, composed of solidified shadow so deep it seemed to suck the light from the crystals around it. It had no face, but a smooth expanse where one should be, but I could feel its attention fix on us the moment we entered. This was the entity that had spoken through the wolf. This was the commander, the Devourer's lieutenant. No one spoke. The sheer scale of the malevolence before us was a physical blow. The hope we'd carried from the canyon evaporated, replaced by a dread so deep it was numb. Kalen was the first to move. He stepped forward, placing himself between our group and the army of shadows. His voice, when he spoke, did not echo. The cavern seemed to absorb it, making his words flat and heavy. "This ends now," he said, and his words were not for the Shadow Lieutenant, but a declaration to the universe. The sealing begins. The faceless entity tilted its head. A voice, dry as dust and cold as the space between stars, emanated from it, bypassing our ears to speak directly into our minds. "You bring a flicker to fight the tide. The heart is broken. The song is ending. We are the silence that follows." "We are the refrain," Kalen countered, his own power beginning to radiate from him, a golden protective aura that pushed against the oppressive gloom. He glanced back at me, and in that look was an entire conversation. "This is it. Are you ready?" My silver flame was a roiling sun in my chest, terrified but defiant. I nodded, stepping up to stand beside him, not behind him. The mark on my shoulder was a brand of fire. Jarek and the Crescent Warriors fanned out behind us, a determined, trembling line of flesh and spirit against the legion of nothingness. The Shadow Lieutenant made a slight, elegant gesture with one clawed hand of darkness. The Void Wolf garrison surged forward in utter silence. "For Aris!" Jarek bellowed, the cry breaking the paralyzing dread. "For our future!" The two forces collided in the crystal-lit gloom of the tomb cavern. It was chaos, but a focused chaos. Kalen was a whirlwind of primal force, his movements a blur, not just fighting, but disrupting, his very presence a challenge to the Shadow's reality. I stayed close to him, my hands weaving streams of silver fire. I was no longer aiming at individual creatures, but at the connections between them, at the tendrils of void energy that linked them to the source, trying to sever their supply. But there were too many. For every one we banished, two more seemed to step from the edges of the tear. The Crescent Warriors fought with desperate bravery, but the despairing touch of the shadows was taking its toll. One by one, they fell, not dead, but empty, their eyes wide and vacant as they were dragged back toward the tear by shadowy tendrils. We were losing. We were being slowly consumed at the doorstep of the wound we had come to mend. I poured out more and more flame, but the vast, hungry emptiness of the tear itself seemed to drink it in. A crushing fatigue, deeper than any I'd ever known, began to weigh me down. This was not just physical. The source was feeding my hope, my light. Kalen took a glancing blow from a void wolf's claw across his back. He snarled, a truly bestial sound, but staggered. The golden hour around him flickered. The Shadow Lieutenant observed it all, a still, dark pillar amidst the storm. The wolf tires. The flame dims. The pattern is old, inevitable. Despair threatened to swallow me whole. We had come so far. We had united. We had understood. And it wasn't enough. The Devourer wasn't even here, and its lieutenant was defeating us.
Then, through the haze of exhaustion and fear, I heard it. Not a whisper from the canyon, but a true voice, gentle and firm, echoing from the very crystals in the walls. It was the voice of the first grove, of the ancestral silver flames. Child of fire, you fight the symptom, not the sickness. The flame is not a weapon against the dark. It is the memory of light before the dark. Do not attack the tear. Remember the fabric. The words struck a chord deeper than any strategy. I stopped trying to burn the shadows. I lowered my hands. I closed my eyes, blocking out the battle, the screams, the cold. I reached not for the power to destroy, but for the memory of wholeness. I thought of the first grove's peace. I thought of Kalen's steadfast presence. I thought of Jarek's hard-won redemption. I thought of the courage of the fallen warriors. I gathered not my fear, but my love for this broken, beautiful, fighting world. The silver flame that erupted from me then was not a blast. It was a slow, radiant wave. It didn't burn. It revealed. It washed over the cavern, over the battling forms, over the bones, and over the ragged, pulsing tear in the world. And in that light, I didn't see a wound to be fought. I saw a tapestry to be rewoven. My eyes snapped open. Across chaos, I met Kalen's. He felt the shift in my energy, saw the change in the light. "Kalen," I cried, my voice clear as a bell. "The first law, not to dominate, but to balance. Don't fight the emptiness, fill it." Understanding dawned in his fierce amber eyes. He gave a sharp, commanding bark, a signal to his very soul. He began to shift, but not into the war form of a giant wolf. His body glowed with that same golden aura, which solidified, deepened, becoming tangible. He was weaving his own essence, his will, his ancient guardian nature, into a pattern, a living golden thread. My silver flame flowed toward him, not to fuel him, but to guide, to illuminate the pattern.
Together, our combined energies, the steadfast guardian and the remembering flame, began to stitch at the frayed edges of the tear. We were not attacking the dark. We were remembering the light. And thread by brilliant thread, the tear began to close. The battle around us didn't stop, but it changed. It became a distant, muted thing, like thunder on a far horizon. All of my being, all of my consciousness was focused on the weave. Kaylin's golden essence was the thread, strong, resilient, humming with the ancient song of protection. My silver flame was the needle, the guide, the illuminator, showing where each stitch of light needed to go to mend the broken picture of reality. We weren't speaking, we were being, a perfect silent symphony. Where our combined energies touched the frayed violet edges of the tear, the chaotic maelstrom beyond stilled, smoothed, and darkened into the peaceful solid black of a stitched seam. It was agonizingly slow. Each inch of progress felt like moving a mountain with our minds. The cold of the void bit at our spirits, and the despair it emitted was a constant scream in our souls, trying to break our concentration. The Shadow Lieutenant realized what was happening. Its placid observation turned to fury. It let out a silent shriek that cracked the crystals in the cavern walls and sent several warriors clutching their heads. It flowed toward us, a tsunami of concentrated negation. "Hold the line!" Jarek's voice was a raw, broken thing, but it held the steel of command. He and the remaining Crescent warriors, perhaps only a dozen left standing, threw themselves into the path of the advancing darkness. They were no longer fighting to kill, but to delay, to buy us seconds. They were the wall, and they were being eroded with every moment. I saw Elder Morwen raise her hands, not in a fighting stance, but in a gesture of ancient warding I'd never seen. A faint greenish light, the simple, natural magic of the earth that our pack had once cherished, sprang from her palms, forming a fragile barrier against the lieutenant's advance. It was like trying to stop a glacier with a candle, but it held for a precious heartbeat. That heartbeat was all we needed. Kaylin poured more of himself into the weave. I felt his life force, his very identity, flowing into the golden thread. He was giving everything, holding nothing back. The tear was now half closed, a jagged scar instead of a gaping hole. The void wolves still in the cavern simply ceased. They unraveled into puffs of inert dust, their connection to the source severed. The Shadow Lieutenant, its purpose gone, its anchor destroyed, let out one final, silent scream of rage that existed only in our minds before its form destabilized, crumbling into a pile of harmless, black sand that blew away on a suddenly fresh, clean breeze flowing from the now healed earth. Silence. True, profound silence. Then, a soft, natural light began to grow in the cavern, not from the crystals, but from the sealed wall itself. It was the gentle, warm glow of living stone, of a wound that has scarred over and is whole once more. I collapsed to my knees, utterly spent. The silver flame inside me was a dim, quiet ember, peaceful and still. Kaylin, still in his glowing, semi-corporeal state, solidified back into his human form and staggered, catching himself on the cavern wall. He was pale, trembling with exhaustion, but his eyes were clear. Jarek and the surviving warriors, their faces streaked with dirt and tears, slowly straightened. They looked around at the peaceful cavern, at the piles of dust that were once monsters, at the sealed wall. The bone-deep despair was gone, replaced by a weary, dazed wonder. We had done it. We had sealed the source. Kayland pushed himself away from the wall and walked to me. He didn't offer a hand up. He simply knelt in front of me, on the same level. His amber eyes searched my face, and in them I saw not just the king, not just the warrior, but the man, the one who had waited, who had believed, who had given everything beside me. "You remembered," his voice hoarse with awe. "We remembered," I corrected softly. A small, true smile touched his lips. He nodded. Then his gaze moved past me to Jarek and the others. He stood, offering me his hand this time. I took it, and he pulled me gently to my feet. He addressed the remnants of the Crescent Pack, my old pack, my new pack, his voice carrying the quiet authority of hard-won victory. "The veil is mended, the balance is restored. You have faced the true darkness, and you have stood. You are no longer just the Crescent Pack. From this day, you are the remembered, the guardians of this scar, and the keepers of the truth of what happened here." Jarek limped forward. He looked at the sealed wall, then at Kaylin, then at me. He placed his fist over his heart once more, and this time every surviving warrior did the same. "We will guard the truth," Jarek vowed, "and we will honor the sacrifice. The remembered stand with the king and the flame, always." The words were not just an oath, they were a healing, a circle finally closing. The pack that had cast me out was now the pack that would guard the proof of why I should never have been cast out. As we turned to leave the chamber of the broken heart, now a chamber of mended hope, I took one last look at the sealed wall. It glowed with a soft internal light. It was not a mark of defeat, but a testament, a scar that spoke of a wound healed and of the love that had healed it. The journey out of the mountains was not a retreat, but a procession of peace. The return to Kaylin's stronghold was not a march, but a homecoming. Word of what happened at the source, carried by the very winds, it seemed, raced ahead of us. When we emerged from the foothills of the Bleeding Mountains, a crowd was waiting at the fortress gates. Not just Kaylin's people, but representatives from nearby packs who had felt the shift in the world, the sudden lifting of a dread they hadn't even known they carried. They didn't see a bedraggled group of survivors. They saw legends walking out of the mist. Kaylin, ever the king, acknowledged them with a raised hand, but his focus was on getting the wounded cared for. The remembered, my old pack, my new pack, were ushered inside with honor, their wounds treated not as failures, but as badges of a battle fought in a realm beyond comprehension. In the days that followed, a new kind of energy buzzed through the stone halls. There were councils, of course. Jarek and Elder Morwen sat with Kaylin's advisors, sharing the full truth of the dire wolf lineage, the silver flame, and the nature of the veil. The old, fearful scrolls were brought out and compared with the living truth we represented. Myths became history before their eyes. But for me, the most profound changes were quieter. I was given chambers of my own, spacious and airy, with a window that looked out over the healing wild forest. I was no longer a fugitive in a guest room. I was Layla of the Silver Flame, and this was my home if I chose it. The exhaustion from the weaving took days to fade. My power was a quiet, deep well within me, no longer a restless, feared thing. It was a part of me, as natural as breathing. I used it gently in the infirmary, helping to heal the lingering spiritual fatigue in the remembered warriors. The touch of my flame now brought only peace, a warmth that spoke of wholeness. One afternoon, a week after our return, I found Kaylin not in the council hall or the training yard, but in a small, sun-drenched courtyard garden. He was tending to a young sapling, his large, capable hands surprisingly gentle on the fragile branches. He sensed me and looked up. The stark, regal lines of his face had softened. There was a peace in his amber eyes that hadn't been there before. "It's an oak," he said, answering my unspoken question. "From an acorn of the first grove. I thought it should grow here, a reminder. A beautiful one, I said, joining him. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the bees hum in the lavender. The councils are going well? They are, he nodded. Fears receding. Understanding is taking root. It will take time, but the foundation is solid. He looked at me. Jarek has asked for your counsel. He wishes to reform the training of the remembered, to include the old wisdom. He believes you should help write the new teachings. The idea didn't scare me. It felt right. I'd like that. And he hesitated, a rare thing for him. There is another request, from several packs. They have young ones, potential healers with sparks they don't understand. They are afraid of them becoming what you were taught you were. He met my gaze. They are asking for a school, a place of guidance, not fear. They are asking you to lead it. The enormity of it washed over me. To take the very thing that caused my exile and turn it into a beacon of hope for others, it was the final perfect healing.
Yes, I whispered, emotion thick in my throat. Yes, that is what the silver flame is for. Kalen's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. I thought you might say that. He turned fully to face me. The playful breeze stirred his dark hair. Layla, he began, his voice serious now, when I found you in the storm, I knew you were my destined guide. What I didn't know was that you would become so much more. You are not just a compass for my duty. You have become the peace in my fortress, the wisdom in my counsel, the light in my... He stopped, the word heart hovering unspoken but felt in the space between us. He didn't say mine as a claim of ownership. He said it as a statement of fact, as undeniable as the sunrise. I was a part of his world, and he was a part of mine. The prophecy spoke of a partnership, I said, my own heart full to bursting, of balance. I think we found it, not as a king and his tool, but as Kalen and Layla. He reached out, not to take my hand, but to gently brush a strand of wind-tossed hair from my face. The touch was respectful, tender, a promise of a connection that went deeper than words, rooted in shared sacrifice and profound respect. It was a halal promise, pure and full of potential. Then let us build that partnership, he said. Let us teach the school, guide the packs, and guard the peace we fought for, together. The following month, under the blossoming boughs of the grove oak, the ceremony was held. It was not a mating ceremony as the packs knew it. It was a bonding of purpose. Jarek stood for me as the elder of my redeemed pack. Kalen's senior advisor stood for him. Before the gathered cacks, the remembered, Kalen's people, and many others, we spoke vows not of possession, but of promise. I promised to be his light in the darkness, his clarity in confusion, his healer in times of spiritual need. He promised to be my strength, my protector, the steadfast ground to my sky-reaching flame. We promised to lead together, to teach together, to build a future where no healer would be feared and no guardian would walk alone. As we spoke the final words, my silver mark and a new corresponding symbol of a protective oak leaf that had appeared on Kalen's wrist glowed softly, then settled into a permanent gentle warmth, a visible sign of an invisible bond. The feast that followed was filled with laughter and music, a new song for a new age. Later, as twilight painted the sky in colors of rose and gold, Kalen and I stood on the battlements, looking out over the peaceful, thriving territory. His hand found mine, our fingers interlacing. It was a connection of equals, of partners. "It's so quiet," I murmured. "It's not quiet," he said, his voice a low, content rumble. He lifted our joined hands, placing my palm over his heart. I could feel its strong, steady beat. "Listen. It's the sound of a world healing. It's the new song." And as I stood there,
the silver flame at peace within me, my hand in the hand of the guardian king, surrounded by a community I had helped save and would help grow, I knew he was right. The storm was over. The shadows were sealed. The wound was mended. And our song, the song of balance and remembrance and hope, was just beginning.